I am here with Dr. E. Patrick Johnson, who is Dean of the School of Communication and the Annenberg Professor of Performance Studies and African American Studies at Northwestern University, where his work centers on gender, sexuality, and race, and other communities that are seen as marginalized. Welcome, Dr. Johnson. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you for having me.
Yes, Dr. Johnson is, you're also the executive producer and narrator of Making Sweet Tea, which is a documentary that we're privileged to have as a part of our festival this year. And the documentary is based on your work in different iterations, and I would love to get into that. But first off, I would like to ask you how you are doing during these times of the pandemic and of the strife that is not new, but it's more widely visible and more widely recognized, I think, because of the pandemic. I know each of us are dealing with this in different ways and in different circumstances, and I just wanted to acknowledge that and to ask you if you would like to talk about how you're processing things and how you're just thinking about it and in how it's playing out right now.
Thank you for asking. So I think, like many Black Americans, it's troubling to um, witness what's going on in our country, and that it seems to be getting worse instead of better, with the constant harassment and murder of Black people by the police, and to be continually I would also harassed by the current administration as policies go out, it seems almost daily, that affect our lives. But I am one of hope and optimism, and I come from a long line of ancestors who experienced much more terror than we would ever imagine. So I remain hopeful and vigilant, and I think that one of the things that's going to get us through is art. So that's what I've been focusing on.
Yes. Speaking of your optimism and your hope and your art, I just want to say that the film is based on your book called Sweet Tea, published in 2008, and as the website for the book beautifully describes, you give voice to a population rarely acknowledged, which are Black gay men from the South who were born, raised, and continue to live in the South. And I think that speaks to what you were saying about ancestors and people who have gone through much worse circumstances. And I think that sharing the stories kind of naturally delves into that, because I know in the film you talk about your parents, your grandparents, and you also share your story in the film. And so thank you for your thoughts on that. And I really believe that art is something that can show us ways of processing these things, and that is why your film is so important. And so first off, I would like to talk about how the film came into existence. And correct me if I'm getting the timeline wrong, but it started with your book, Sweet Tea, Gay Black Men in the South, an Oral History, back in '08. And then you performed the stories of the men or of some of the men from your book. It started with a stage reading called Pouring Sweet Tea, Gay Black Men of the South Tell Their Stories. And then that was lengthened and expanded into a full-length play, which had its world premiere in 2010 called Sweet Tea. And now, currently, we have the documentary called Making Sweet Tea. So I was wondering if you could say a little bit about the path from Sweet Tea to Making Sweet Tea, and also how these different iterations reflects your methodology as a professor that you call multimodal methodologies.
Yeah, so yeah, you have that timeline down. The looking even broader, to provide some context, I actually started conducting the interviews for Sweet Tea in 2004. So, this has been a 16-year journey. So from 2004 to 2006, I started collecting these oral histories, traveling throughout the South, 15 different states. I interviewed 77 different men between the ages of 19 and 93. And the eldest member that I interviewed, Countess Vivian, is also featured in the film. It was in 2006 that I began performing the story because people think I'm not being truthful when I say what I'm about to say, but it is true. When I started collecting these stories, I wasn't thinking about a performance at all, at all. I was more interested in documenting the lives of Black gay men in the South. But as I began to conduct the interviews, I ran into so many wonderful storytellers and so many wonderful stories that I realized that these stories needed to live in performance, that they couldn't just be on the page, that you wouldn't be able to pick up the nonverbals, the accents, because people, even in North Carolina, people in Western North Carolina don't speak the same as folks in Eastern North Carolina. So I wanted to find a way to represent those voices. And so I started performing in the stage reading called Pouring Tea. And then in 2009, a producer by the name of James Sachs, who I'm still really good friends with, approached me about turning the stage play, the stage reading into a full production. And that was yet another experience for me because I had never done professional theater. And I have to say that even to say I don't like it. I like doing my little, bare bones stage readings because theater productions are just that. It's a lot of people. It's a lot of, it's a very different process. At any rate, so the show premiered in 2010 here in Chicago, and we toured the play to a number of different places, including to North Carolina, to Durham at the Durham Arts Council. We did a 3-week run there in 2014, and in 2015, we did the show at the National Black Theater Festival. So we did get to bring the play to North Carolina. And it was actually at the premiere of the play in 2010 here in Chicago that John L. Jackson, who is the co-executive producer, saw the play, and he's a filmmaker, and he felt it would be really interesting to document how I went from oral history to a book to a play. He wanted to sort of document that experience, and he approached me about making a film. And I was like, sure. And then nothing happened. It wasn't until about 3 years after that, like 2013, that he circled back and said, no, I think we should make a film about this. And so we started filming in 2014, actually at the Durham Arts Council. Some of my process that you see in the film, when I'm talking to Joseph Meagle, the director of that particular version of the show, about who we're going to include, how we're going to, stage it, and so on and so forth. That's when we started filming. And as the film process evolved, it became no longer just about us uh, transitioning it became more than just about the backstory of how the play became, how the book became a play. And it became about what has happened to these men since I had interviewed them. What has happened to our relationship, my relationship with them over the decade since I interviewed them. And more importantly, and this is a big shift, um, what is my relationship to my own hometown of Hickory, North Carolina? And that was a really dramatic turn in the film because I did not want this to be about me at all. I went kicking and screaming. But everybody involved with the film, and I mean even the stage play, because the stage play also has my story in it.
Mm.
They all said that, you know, what's interesting about this process is your relationship to these men.
Mm-hmm.
And because you are a Black gay man from the South, we want to hear your story as well.
Mm-hmm.
And again, I didn't want to have anything to do with it. But as you see, I lost that battle, and I'm in the play and the film. But what I will say, Chad, is that being forced to focus on my story really made me realize the significance of what I asked of these men.
Mm-hmm.
I had, you know, interviewed them and asked them to share some of the most intimate details of their lives.
Mm-hmm.
But then I had to turn the microphone toward myself and ask myself those same questions.
Mm-hmm.
And it required a reckoning with my past, my relationships with my hometown, with my family, that you see get played out in the film. So all of that was a part of this 16-year process for me, from the conducting the oral history to the stage reading to the stage play to the film. And now there's yet another iteration of Sweet Tea, and the play script was just published last month by Northwestern University Press. And so now college and high school students can put on the play if they want to. And that'll be really interesting, watching someone play me.
Yes. And in the film, you went into your subjects' homes and performed for them. So they were watching you perform them.
Yeah.
And that was one of the most fascinating parts, because you talked about, you know, asking them to recount many experiences, many of which were painful. So not only had they already done that for you, but now they are watching you do that, depict them, and it's all on camera. And so now that the play script is being published, as you said, you will be seeing people performing something that you created and performed, and so I think that is a fascinating full circle moment, and also just
Yeah.
kind of like circles inside of circles inside of circles. And so I am looking forward to that publication. I would like to follow up with something that you mentioned about how you faced the idea of telling your own story, and how you asked these men to tell their stories, and then as you went into your own story, you realized what you were asking of them. There's an image, and also that becomes a motif, that when I think of the film, I always think of this. It's you walking through your hometown of Hickory, North Carolina. Sometimes there's voiceover narration that you provide. Sometimes you're just walking down different streets, different places. And that keeps coming up to me because this idea of home, coming home, living at home, coming back home, leaving, coming back. This just idea of this recurring idea, and also staying home for people who still live in their hometowns or still live in the South. What, how can you say a little bit more about this idea of home, whether you're leaving, coming back, or whether, and how it's always a part of us, even if we do leave, and how we can kind of negotiate that idea of home, regardless of what choices we make, about whether we live at home or whether we don't, and how that connects with just your having to come to terms or begin to come to terms with your own story after asking these men to tell their stories to you.
Oh, that's a really great question, and I think it hits at the heart of the choices that everybody, at least in the film, make about whether they're going to stay at their, in their hometown, or even in some cases stay at home with their parents. And our homes are very formidable in who we become. I grew up in a family of 7, and though all of my siblings and I, grew up together, sat around the same table and shared the same space, we all took very different paths. And sometimes I wonder, wow, we all were a group in the same house, but we made very different choices. But the thing I think that brings us, that connects us, is that sense of home that we carry with us. I tell people all the time, I don't live in the South anymore, but the South is in me. Just like I don't attend a church regularly anymore, but the church is in me because I grew up in the church. And I think we continue to sort of grapple with what home means to us. For some, it means security and safety and care. And for others, it means turmoil and terror and all kinds of negative things. And for some, all of that mixed in together. And I think in the film in particular, you see it's kind of like a parallel journey between Charles and myself. We're both from the same hometown, but we made very different choices. And even at one point, Charles says that in the film that I stayed in my hometown while others didn't. I don't think he's necessarily making a reference to me, but I do think it's a good point that in some ways he made the decision to stay at home and take the brunt of whatever disparaging comments or what difficulties, whereas other people made the choice to flee to the big city. Thinking that it's going to be, you're going to have more freedom, you're going to be safer, but that's not always the case either. People, LGBTQ folks who live in cities are sometimes more susceptible to violence than they are in their hometown. So home for me works on many different registers. It's a frame of mind. It's also a feeling, and it's also a physical place. And when I go home to Hickory, and as I do in the film, walking down those different streets, it evokes a complex feeling of me, because some of it is nostalgic for those good times, and some of it is the bad memories, of experiencing racism, homophobia. But there's always a sense, for me at least, there's a sense of pride coming from a small town, knowing how African Americans in my hometown in particular really um, came together to form a community that tried to educate young people, that supported the community, that if someone was in need, they were going to be taken care of by. Um, and, you know, again, the flip side of that is and we see this in the film, my own decision about not being out when they were celebrating my accomplishments and having to deal with that.
That was another powerful moment that I can identify with as well in the film. And thank you for that answer. That was beautiful. If you don't mind, I want to reiterate something you said. You said home is a frame of mind. It's also a feeling, and it's also a physical place. And I think that is a beautiful way of encapsulating how the idea of home is so complex. And I still live in the South, but I don't live in my hometown. So I also like how you talked about, you know, how someone could like be in their hometown still, but also have or have also made the choice to like actually live with their parents. So there are different ways you can be home. Like yeah. I may still be home since I live in the South, but I'm not home because I don't live where I originally am from. And even if you leave home, you still have that in you. And so it's like you are home in a certain way still, no matter what you do or no matter where you go. Depending on how you deal with that idea of home in your mind, in your heart, in your spirit. And something else that resonated with me as well, you said that Charles made the comment of how he stayed while some don't. And I think that says something to how people who do leave, it says something to how they think of their home. And I think that also speaks to something that your book speaks to. Your book, Sweet Tea, it addresses stereotypes and it addresses how we often think that, the South is this backward and repressive place. But for the people who stay there, they have to negotiate their lives in the situation they're in. So I think a lot of times when people leave the South, they kind of have this idea, this reductive idea that the South is just this place that we should just all leave. And it kind of forgets the experiences of the people who are still there. So I think the film and your book, they brilliantly address that idea. And so could you say a little bit about this idea of how you address stereotypes about the South when you want to send a message that we need to honor the stories of people who do stay?
Yeah, so I think that I'll get to the answer to that in a sort of roundabout way, in that I often tell people you have to love yourself more than your fear of losing your loved ones, and really making decisions to stand in your own truth. Just as we have a process that we go through as LGBTQ folks to come into our sexuality or our gender identity, those who love us or who proclaim that they love us also have to go through their own process and come to know all of you as opposed to just the part that they know or want to know. And sometimes you're on different paths toward that. And I myself made the decision with my own family that they had to do their own work around accepting my gayness while I continue to live my own life. So I'll say that. And people think that the South is one monolithic community, and we know that it is not. Even within one state, or even within one city, there can be multiple communities and cultures that do things very differently. You know, a classic example from North Carolina is Eastern North Carolina has their barbecue, and Western North Carolina has their barbecue.
Absolutely.
Yeah, when you cross over from Statesville into Winston-Salem, liver mush becomes liver pudding. So there are all these nuanced differences that are really significant. So I think just as our language and general culture is different in the South, so are gay people in the South. So that you can't paint the South with one brush. And not everybody's in the closet. Not everybody is effeminate. Not everybody is butch or whatever label. You know, we are a potpourri of difference. And I think that one of the things that the book and the film demonstrate is that very thing, how there can be these different people from different generations reflecting the multiplicity of the South.
Yes.
So I'm hoping that, you know, as people see the film, that they will come to understand that, because, you know, we spend time in Georgia, we spend time in North Carolina, we spend time in Washington, D.C., and all those different places are very different. And the stereotypes, some of the people fit the stereotypes and some of them don't.
Yes, and I think I want to bring up just one thing that you made me think of when you were brilliantly responding to that question, is something from the community forum back in 2010 that I referenced earlier. You were talking about George Egerton, Countess Vivian, from the film and from your other work, and you were saying that justice is about being justice for him was about being who he was in the world. And that's the broader idea, that justice is being yourself and being who you are, which might be calling people out for things that they say. And that spoke to me because it connects with what you were saying earlier about living yourself more than your fear of losing your loved ones. So thank you for that. I have a couple more questions quickly. Could you say a little bit about your multimodal methodologies and how you noticed how different ways of presenting your research, books, plays, films, the different ways that you see it resonating in your audiences, and how it's important to have those different ways of expressing and of sharing your work, and how that has shown up in the reactions that you've gotten from your readers, from the attendees at your plays, and from the people who have seen the movie.
Yeah, that's a really great question. As a scholar, let me put it this way. As a scholar who's also an ethnographer and an oral historian, my goal is to conduct research and render it in a way that the people whose lives it's about understand it.
Yes.
So I don't want to produce a book that only other academics are going to read by filling it with a lot of jargon and so on. Because for me, the kind of work that I'm interested in is also social justice work, providing a platform for marginalized voices. And I don't feel that the most productive way to do that is by overlaying it with a lot of highly obscurantist language. Because I also think that we're all theorists. And so my motivation for rendering this research in these different forms is so that it reaches different audiences,
Mm.
because people who come to see the play may not ever read the book. People
Mhm.
who read the book may not see the film, but I'm providing different ways for people to enter into this work.
Mhm.
And the film in particular is the way to, you can do things with film that you can't do in a play,
Mhm.
uh, in terms of providing context for some of the stories. You get to see Charles in his shop doing someone's hair.
Mhm.
You get to see Freddie working on some of his art. You get to see Duncan in his church. Those are certain things that you can't do in the form of a book or even um, a play. So for me, it's vitally important that I continue to come up with creative, artistic ways to render this scholarly research so that it reaches the broadest audiences. Um, because the ultimate goal is to uplift these voices. And sometimes just doing it through a book is not enough. Um, Doing it through uh, artistic ways that are compelling for people. You know, lots of people love movies.
Mhm.
Lots of people love the theater. So they'll spend 90 minutes in the theater with you, but they may not sit down with a 600-page book. um, so I'm really invested in these multimodal forms, and I really I have to give credit to my co-executive producer and collaborator John L. Jackson, because his um, his school at the University of Pennsylvania and the Annenberg School for Communication, they're really invested in multimodal forms of research, and they have students who are actually making films as a part of their dissertation.
Mhm.
Uh, so I think uh, having the um, creativity and the spirit to seek out different uh, forms of knowledge production are really, really crucial, particularly at a time like this when we're experiencing online
Mhm.
communication and learning. We have to find other ways um, to disseminate knowledge. We can't revert to those old ways all the time. So
Mhm.
I'm really excited about what's next. And I will say that in my most recent book, Honeypot, I've gone to yet another genre that's creative nonfiction.
Mhm.
And so Honeypot is the stories of Black Southern women who love women. And I found creating a sort of alternate universe uh, was a really fun and fascinating way to render those stories as well.
Yes, thank you so much for that. Um, I just want to highlight one thing you said about thinking back, always thinking back to the ultimate goal that you have. And if that ultimate goal is not being serviced from what you're doing, you have to come up with different ways of doing it. And that speaks to my work. I'm a PhD student, but I would love to talk to you at some other time about this because I'm always thinking back to that when I'm looking at my work. And so you mentioned that your play of Sweet Tea will be published. The play
It's
script.
already published. It's out.
It is already published. It is out. That is fantastic. And you mentioned your book Honeypot. Are there any other things that you're currently working on or that are coming out in the future that you would like us to know about?
Well, I've been fairly busy over the last few years, so no, I don't have a new project. You know, we're promoting the film
Mhm.
and hoping, you know, we're sort of uh, the 23rd of September marked the world premiere of Making Sweet Tea
Okay.
here in Chicago at the Reeling Film Festival. And so we're nearing the end of the year of the film festival circuit, and we're now in the process of trying to get a distributor.
Mhm.
So, you know, hopefully Netflix will come knocking at our door. Um,
Yes.
and so we continue to do that. I'm continuing to do book talks around Honey Pot, and um, I'm also really curious to see what happens with now that the play has been published, to see if anybody decides to produce that. That'll be really interesting. Uh, so I don't have any new projects as of yet. Um, I have enough right now going on.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Is there anything else you would like to share or talk about or mention as we wrap up?
I just want to say I'm just really happy that the film was um, accepted into your film festival. I have relatives in Winston-Salem,
Mm.
and I interviewed people from Winston-Salem for the book. We used to call it just Winston. We called it Salem. So I'm really excited for the film to be a part of the film festival, and that it's being shown in North Carolina. It's so important to me that uh, it be distributed there and people get to see it, because you know you may recognize some of those places. You know, we have
Mhm.
I-40 is a
Mhm.
there, and of course Hickory, but also Durham is also featured in the film. So I just hope as many people get to see the film. And again, just thank you all for including it.
Yes, and we are, like I said before, we are privileged that we're able to show your film, and I want to thank you for taking time with us, Dr. Johnson. We are really excited for our festival to start, and we're very excited that you have spent a little bit of time with us this morning. So thank you so
Absolutely.
much. Thank you so
Thank you.
much. Thank you.
Take care.
You too.
Bye bye.
Bye bye.